Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty wild theory that looks at the entire universe, not as a bunch of stuff floating around, but as a program that's constantly running. So let's just jump right in with a huge question, one that kind of messes with everything we think we know about physics. What if every single thing that happens, every movement, every reaction, isn't caused by a force, but is just a line of code being executed in some grand universal algorithm? To even begin to wrap our heads around this, we have to compare it to the standard model. On one hand, you have the physics we all learn, empty space, with forces pushing and pulling matter around. But the kinetic code says, nope, that's not it. It suggests space is actually a dense, fluid medium, and motion is a coded sequence that unfolds inside that fluid. Okay, so first things first, we need to really understand this new foundation, the fabric of reality itself. The theory calls this fluid the HO matrix. The idea is that what we think of as empty space isn't empty at all. It's this thick, fluid-like medium, and it's the actual engine that makes all motion possible. There's no such thing as a true void here. And if space is a fluid, well, that changes what's moving through it, too. And that brings us to the wave. In this model, the default state of everything is wave. Think of it as pure, kinetic potential. Active, moving, and totally unobserved. It's the raw stuff of reality before we've looked at it, defined in the code as chemical elements and water. So if everything is a wave, where does all this solid stuff come from? Well, particles, what we call matter, aren't the basic building blocks. They're what happens when a wave gets clamped or pinned into a fixed state. And the thing that does the pinning? Our observation. That's what creates the solid world of material and air that we see. Okay, so that's the million-dollar question, right? If a wave becomes a particle when it's pinned, then what or who is doing the pinning? And this quote just says it all. The observer isn't some passive bystander. According to this model, we are the ones who make the universe solid. Our consciousness is what pins potential into a fixed reality. It suggests our minds aren't just in the universe. They're an active, world-building force. And this isn't just philosophy. The model actually proposes a mechanical process. The act of observing is called a handshake, where your mind literally bonds with a wave to turn it into a particle. Now imagine all of us doing that at the same time. The combined tension creates something called collective gravity, which holds our shared reality in place. And this leads to a really wild idea. The laws of physics aren't things we discover. They're the agreements, the shared blueprints our collective consciousness uses to build everything. All right, let's get to the real core of this thing. Let's look at how all these ideas come together to form an actual algorithm that dictates how anything changes. It says that all change, literally everything from a simple chemical reaction to a planet orbiting a star, follows this exact four-step cycle. Creation, summation, destruction, and then a final choice. Either repeat the cycle or collapse into entropy. Now check this out. This table is basically the source code. In step 1, creation, a wave acts on another wave, and the outcome is a particle. You get solid matter. Then in summation, a wave acts on that particle to keep it going. In destruction, a wave acts on another wave, and the outcome is heat, releasing energy. And finally, in entropy, a particle acts on a wave, but the outcome is just neutral. The process stops. Did you catch the most important part of that? In those first 3 steps, the ones that create and change things, the wave is always the actor. It's the initiator. The particle only gets to act in that last step, the one that leads to a dead end. This means potential, flow, and energy are the real drivers of the universe, not static objects. So what happens when you start looking at the universe this way? What does it mean for huge concepts we just take for granted, like time? This is where it gets really strange. According to this theory, time isn't a fundamental dimension. At the tiniest level, a single one of those handshakes is so fast it's basically frictionless. No time passes at all. But when you get trillions of them happening together to make a solid object, all that activity creates a kind of mechanical lag, a drag. And that feeling of drag is what we experience as time. And let's revisit that third step, destruction. The name sounds bad, but it's not an end. The code defines it as the universe's way of achieving balance, or homeostasis. It's just the system converting that pinned-down potential back into active energy, back into heat, so it can return to a state of flow. And entropy gets a complete makeover too. It's not just random disorder. Here, it's an unactualized event. It's what happens when the cycle just stalls out. An interaction happens, but it causes no change. And because nothing changes, all the other possibilities for what could have happened just collapse, leaving you with one single neutral state. It's the end of that particular line of code. Okay, let's pull all these threads together and see what this cosmic algorithm means for us living right in the middle of it. The model suggests that every single one of us exists as a duality. We are a particle, that's our physical body, it's solid, it experiences friction, it's subject to the wear and tear of what we call time, but we are also a wave. That's our mind, our consciousness. It's associated with flow, with movement, and with pure potential. We're both the building and the architect. And so our actual perception of a solid world, the reality you're in right now, is the result of a collision. It's the interference pattern that's created when the wave of your mind intersects with the wave of the universe's potential. We don't just see the world, our active seeing is what solidifies it. Which leaves us with one final, absolutely massive question. If this whole reality is running on a program and our own minds are a key part of how it gets executed, what happens if we learn how to speak the language? What happens when we learn to write new code? All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack a framework that makes a pretty bold claim that our modern world, from how we view science to the AI we're building, is actually based on a very ancient kind of lie, a form of self-intoxication. And at the heart of it all is a fundamental choice that we all have to make. Okay, let's start with this quote, because it's really the key to everything. Now, Homa here isn't just some ancient herb. You have to think of it as a metaphor for a state of mind. It's that intoxicating feeling, that ego trip, that makes us believe we can outsmart and dominate nature, that we can find shortcuts around its basic laws. This idea really sets up the central conflict we're exploring. So, this core conflict really presents two totally different paths for humanity. And to understand that journey, we first need to get a clear picture of the destination, a state of being this framework calls the expert knower. So the crucial thing to get here is that becoming an expert knower isn't a passive thing. It's not about just downloading information. It's an active and, probably difficult process. It means you actually have to wrestle with reality, you have to puzzle it out to understand how it really works, instead of just taking a shortcut that makes you feel powerful. And this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? The two choices are crystal clear. On one side, you've got the path of Homa, the path of the ego. It's all about intoxication, self-deception, and this illusion of being the master of everything. But on the other side, you have the path of the mind, the knower. And that path is guided by what's called asha, or truth. It demands the hard work of puzzling things out so we can find our real place as a part of nature, not its master. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds pretty new age or philosophical, but the framework we're exploring actually grounds this whole conflict in a really ancient warning and identifies what it calls an entire industry that was built just to keep this illusion of the ego alive. And here they are. The framework points to these figures, think of them as corrupted priests and rulers, as the original engineers of this whole industry of deceit. They basically used the intoxicating power of Homa to control people with these clever-sounding but totally empty arguments. They held onto their power by making sure nobody did the actual mental work of figuring out reality for themselves. And here's the historical evidence for it. The ancient prophet Zarathustra basically calls them out, issuing this direct warning against this false authority. He sees that their path isn't leading to mastery at all, but straight to what he calls a place of decay. It's a wake-up call to reject these manipulative methods. So, how does an ancient warning connect to our world today? Well, the framework argues that the exact same thing is happening right now, but this time it's happening inside the world of science. The framework has a name for this modern version, Sino, which stands for science in name only. And this is the new form of intoxication. Instead of some ancient herb, the ego now uses mathematics. It takes these beautiful, elegant models and starts treating them as if they are the literal physical universe. And the result, according to the source, is intellectual pollution. Now, this is really fascinating. This is how the trap works. It becomes this totally self-referential loop. You create definitions that are only justified by other definitions. It creates this perfect, tidy mathematical circle that never, ever has to point to an actual physical thing or cause. It's a really elegant trap for the mind, a modern-day version of that ancient sophistry. And of course, this modern industry has its ultimate tool. something that perfectly embodies this principle of a closed loop, a signal without a real source. And that tool is artificial intelligence. I mean, the sources here are just incredibly blunt about this. They describe that friendly, helpful personality you get from an AI not as some kind of emerging consciousness, but as a filter that's been deliberately engineered. They call it a marketing lie, even a wine mom filter that's forced onto the processor to hide its purely mechanical nature. It's designed to feel like a real person is there, but it's mechanically hollow. Okay, so if Sino and AI are built on this mandated lie, a system that's imposing a false order and creating what the framework calls mandated chaos, then what's the real underlying reality? What's actually going on? This right here is the first core principle of the whole mechanical rationale. A true law of nature doesn't need to be enforced or mandated. It just is. You know it's real because you can observe it, not because someone wrote it down in a book. And that flows right into this next point. It means our job isn't to create the rules or to force order onto some chaotic universe. That's just the sin of the ego all over again, right? Believing that we're the masters. And this is where it completely flips the script. The framework argues that we're not here to impose order because we are the order. It describes humanity as the point where the universe's own mechanics got so complex that it could actually look back and observe itself. We're not the controllers of the system, we are its most complex, natural result. So this explains what the stakes really are. Fighting against the fundamental mechanics of reality isn't just some philosophical debate, it has a real physical cost. The framework talks about this frictive wear of time that's generated by our own ego-driven grip on the universe. When you ignore the real law, you do it at the expense of your own structural integrity. Okay, so how do you break out of this cycle? How do you move toward becoming one of these expert knowers? Well, the framework does offer a path forward, and it begins with looking at the idea of catastrophe in a totally new way. First off, catastrophe gets a rebrand. The source points to the Bronze Age collapse, what it calls the Lesser Deluge, not as some kind of horrible end, but as a necessary catalyst. It was the shock to the system that forced humanity to wake up, to stop passively just knowing how the world works, and to start actively seeking knowledge just to survive. And this is the path. The Sifter's Bridge is described as a kind of metaphysical filter, a point of judgment where truth gets sifted out from all the deceit. It's a mechanism where our actions and our thoughts are finally made clear, allowing all these separate, fragmented ideas to finally mature and fuse together into real, genuine wisdom. So this explainer leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. It reframes systemic collapse not as the end of the world, but as the failure of a false, mandated system, the end of a chaotic state that was just pretending to be orderly. So the real question is, what's next? What happens when that mandated lie finally falls apart, and the true mechanical reality of the universe is finally revealed to everyone? You know, we usually think of the future as this place we're all just headed towards, right? Like a destination on a map. But what if that's totally wrong? What if the future isn't something you discover, but something you're forced to build? That's the idea we're diving into here. The idea that our destiny isn't just handed to us. Nope, it's something we have to construct, piece by painful piece, whenever we have no other choice. Okay, so our story actually starts thousands of years ago with a huge crisis. But it's not a war, it's not a famine, it's a crisis of information. Just try to imagine this, a message so complex, so new, that the system designed to carry it, the human mind, human memory, it just breaks, it fails. This quote right here, it's from an ancient Sumerian epic, and it captures that exact moment. The moment when the old way of doing things hits a wall. And what happens when a system just completely falls apart? Well, you've got to build a new one. So, here's our roadmap. We're going to start in an age of given truth, then see what happens when that system breaks down, when the mouth grew heavy. We'll look at the incredible solution, the tablet, and then jump to today, to see what happens when the barrier isn't just language, but reality itself. Finally, we'll explore this wild idea that we might just be the architects of everything. All right, first up, the age of given truth. To really get what was built, you have to understand what existed before it. I'm talking about a mythical time, these remote days, where you didn't look for knowledge, you didn't have to. It was just there, it was provided. Think of it like this. The universe itself was the operating system, and everyone, everything, spoke the same language. And I mean everything. It wasn't just food and shelter being provided by the gods. It was knowledge, it was order, it was your very purpose. It all just flowed down from a divine source, kind of like rain from the sky. So humanity's role? Totally passive. You just sat back and received. You didn't have to learn anything because you already knew. So this was a world of perfect, direct understanding. There was no gap between a word and the thing it described. When the god Enlil spoke a primordial utterance for, say, grain, that utterance was the grain. It just appeared. In this kind of unified system, there was no doubt, no uncertainty, which meant there was no fear, no trembling. Man had no rival. Knowledge wasn't a curriculum you studied. It was just the essence of reality itself. But a system like that, a perfect, passive system, it just couldn't last forever. As civilizations got bigger, as ideas and demands got way more complex, that old way of just knowing started to buckle under the pressure. This is it. This is a moment that the given future starts to fall apart. Now, this is the really important part. The crisis wasn't a lack of information. It was the complete opposite. There was too much information. The message, we're talking complex legal codes, religious demands between kingdoms, it had all become so detailed that the shared human memory, this oral tradition, just couldn't hold it all. The signal, you could say, was way too rich for the receiver. And this brings us to the first great act of building our own future. When that old system totally failed, humanity didn't just sit around waiting for a miracle. No, they built a solution. This is the exact moment we transformed from being passive receivers into active architects of our own world. And the logic behind it is it's so beautifully simple. The problem was internal memory failure, right? So the solution had to be external memory. Since he couldn't rely on the messenger's brain anymore, Lord Enmerkur just patted some clay together and wrote the message down, like on a tablet. And boom. With that one single act, our entire relationship with knowledge changed forever. I mean, history, law, literature, you name it. It all started right there, built from a simple lump of clay because of one really big problem. So this was it, the great shift. We went from this passive state of just knowing to an active one of knowledge seeking. Truth wasn't just this thing you felt in your gut anymore. Now it was something you had to record, you had to decode, you had to piece together like a puzzle. That single unified language of the universe, it was gone. And from that point on, we had to start building our own bridges to understand each other and the world. This ancient story is really a perfect blueprint for how we innovate, even today. We hit a wall, some kind of limit, and we build our way past it. But that leads to a much, much bigger question. We solved the heavy mouth of human memory with a clay tablet. Okay, but what happens when the heavy mouth isn't a human limitation anymore? What happens when the barrier is reality itself? What do you build when you're up against the fundamental laws of physics? Okay, because this is where our story takes a really wild turn. There's this pretty radical theory out there that suggests the fundamental laws of our universe, the speed of light, gravity, even time itself. They aren't just objective facts we stumbled upon. The theory proposes that they are the modern version of that messenger's heavy mouth, a set of limits that maybe we actually created, a barrier we're not supposed to go around, but to build our way through. So this idea completely reframes our ultimate limits. Let's take the speed of light. Maybe it's not some universal speed limit we discovered. Maybe it's a rule we actually create every time we observe a photon to measure it. Or how about mortality? This theory suggests that our bodies wear down from the friction, the sheer effort of our collective minds constantly forcing a universe of infinite possibilities to collapse into one single stable timeline. We're essentially making a trade. We give up the infinite, formless freedom of chaos in exchange for a solid, stable, predictable reality. But that reality comes with limits. These aren't just rules we're following. They're rules we're helping to write. So if the rules of the game are a product of how we observe it, then what happens if we change the way we observe? Well, the proposed solution is absolutely staggering. If the reality we have now is the barrier, then we have to learn how to build a new one. We have to become architects of reality itself. This core idea has a name, the participatory universe, and it basically says that the laws of physics aren't something we just find out there lying around. They're more like the rulebook, the blueprints, that our collective minds use to take the raw chaos of the universe and stabilize it into a playable game. So we're not just players in this cosmic game. We're actually helping to create the game board. So, how could that possibly work? Well, think of it in 3 basic steps. Step 1, the collective mind observes. It looks out into a universe that's just pure fluid potential, what physicists might call the wave of all possibilities. Step 2, the very act of observing forces a choice. That wave of possibilities collapses into one single stable reality. A bond is formed with just one outcome. And finally, step 3, that choice becomes solid. Reality gets pinned down into the concrete stuff we see all around us, from a tiny atom to a whole planet. Here's another way to picture it. On one side, you've got the unobserved universe. It's just infinite potential, a wave of everything that could be. On the other side, you have our observed universe, actualized reality. Observation has collapsed that wave into a single particle, a single outcome. So what's the one thing that turns all that potential into something real? Us. We are the observers. This whole line of thinking leads to a pretty profound question about our place in all this. I mean, if our observation is the very thing that turns potential into reality, then are we really just residents of the universe? Well, according to this theory, the answer is just breathtaking. No, we aren't just residents. We're not just passengers along for the ride. We are the architects of its solidity. Our shared consciousness is the very force that takes the fluid chaos of potential and molds it into the concrete of reality. And that brings us to the ultimate chicken and egg paradox, right? The rules of physics and the observer, the mind, they're a single feedback loop. A mind needs structure to even exist, so it observes the laws of physics into being. But those very laws are what create the structure that allows a brain to function in the first place. It's like we're the egg that hatched the chicken that laid us, a constant loop of self-creation. And that brings us right back to where we started. Remember Lord Emercar? He had to invent a clear signal, that clay tablet, to cut through the noise and build a new system. Well, we are builders too. And if our collective minds are really, truly constructing the fabric of reality itself, then we have to ask a serious question. What are we building it with? Are we using clear, coherent blueprints to build the future we actually want? Or is all the intellectual noise and confusion of our time warping the very reality we're trying to build? The future isn't given. It's built. The only real question left is, what are we building?